Hey everyone, welcome to our webinar today. It's noon here in Eastern Time. Thrilled to be here with some of the godfathers, or at least what I call godfathers of the MarTech space. I couldn't be happier to be welcoming Scott Brinker and Nikhil Raj, who I'll introduce in just a minute. Just a few housekeeping measures briefly before we jump into the great content they have to kind of chat back and forth today. I'm Dave Paprocki. I'm head of marketing here at MetaRouter. I've been here for about 5 years and thrilled to have these guys. We've been talking a lot internally around all of the chaos and changes in the MarTech landscape. As many of you know, I don't want to steal any thunder, but some of these logos are getting pixelated on this. And so we want to dissect that a little bit, and also what that means for AI-powered marketing, which essentially everyone's adopted at this point. And if you're not, you're quickly catching up. So without further ado, I'll introduce Scott Brinker. I think we all know Scott with Chief MarTech, as well as well in the HubSpot ecosystem as well. Scott, welcome. Oops, I think you might be muted, Scott. Sorry.
It's never actually a true video experience unless somebody starts speaking while they're unmuted. So
you did that deliberately, didn't you, Scott? Go ahead, yeah.
Just wanted to get that out of the way here at the beginning.
We'll never know what you said either. We'll never know.
Anyway, thanks, Dave. It's wonderful to be here with you and Nikhil. This is a fantastic topic. Nikhil, do you want to actually share with folks a little bit about your background? Because even before coming here to MetaRouter, you have tremendous experience in customer data infrastructure and how that applies in the world of commerce.
So thank you, Scott. I'm just trying to keep up with you there. It's all started with the experience I had at Walmart a decade plus ago, where I had responsibility for all of their MarTech and their advertising products that we launched as well. But at that time, I think in your chart, there were probably 15 to 100 logos. Now there's 15,000. I don't know if we have a picture of that chart, but it's been a pretty crazy thing to see this thing explode. But my background at Walmart was a couple of pixels on this chart that we built internally, and then went off to Bain & Company to advise other retailers and marketplaces on both MarTech and advertising. Spent some time at an ad tech startup called Moloco last couple of years. Fantastic run there. And then now I joined MetaRouter as I started to think about how we can broadly enable marketers, advertising professionals, analytics professionals around the world with a single sort of capability layer. And that's kind of how I ended up here. But thank you for joining us, and really, really a privilege to be with you on this conversation.
Yeah, no, privilege is mine. And what the perfect time for this too, because data has always been important in marketing, but now finally in this age here of AI, people are very rapidly realizing that data is the strategic asset that is what distinguishes one person's use of AI from another's. I guess maybe just setting the stage a little bit, since you brought up the eye chart. And you're right, back in the day when you were driving that at Walmart, I first did a version of this landscape in 2011. It had around 150 technologies, which, again, at the time, we all thought 150 technologies. That's crazy. Surely this whole thing is going to consolidate. And of course it didn't. It's been as you say, a truly crazy explosion.
Yeah, now anybody can vibe code themselves an audience builder, right? That's kind of where we are.
Oh, and that's even another level. And hopefully we'll talk a bit about that towards the end too, because it is not just the commercial landscape here. Is also increasingly companies also being able to build more custom apps on top of it too. But what are they building it on top of? Because for like all these thousands and thousands of MarTech applications out there, at the end of the day, it's data that actually feeds all of them. There's a number of these that generate data. There's a number of them that consume data, but it is all about data. And if there's been sort of one through line for the history of the MarTech landscape, it's been that that's usually where the challenge is for most organizations. The actual, experience and engagement technologies, incredible stuff. But if they can't get the right data flowing across these systems, they really aren't able to harness anywhere near the full potential. So maybe that's a good segue, to start talking about, what's actually involved in AI-ready data.
Go ahead, please. Yeah.
Well, I was just going to ask you, maybe even one thing before that is when we talk about data, many different kinds of data. And I sort of feel like a lot of marketers, so much of the focus has been on sort of classic structured data. Like, okay, well, we have a customer contact record, a customer, order history. And don't get me wrong, it's still very important. But I think some of the things that we're seeing right now is more and more of this sort of streaming behavioral data that's able to be harnessed, more and more unstructured data. Can you maybe just give us as a level set, like sort of a walkthrough of the different kinds of data that people are wrestling with?
Yeah, you nailed that, Scott. I think structured, unstructured, behavioral are all different types of data. But I think the paradigm with AI is shifting from querying data using, for lack of a better way to say it, SQL queries or some kind of database queries to leveraging embeddings and AI generated models to build customer profiles real time, right? That's kind of where I think things are starting to go, where you no longer need to have 1 billion customer records with 1 billion features on each, and a large part of that matrix being mostly empty, right? Because you don't have all features for all customers. So if you could create embeddings and distributions and represent these customers in mathematical ways, and then now you have captured all of the structured, unstructured streaming data all into one model, one vector, if you will. And now where the world is going to is now just updating that vector. Mm-hmm. So now we have a full representation of your entire history. And now with that, hey, let's add a new thing. Scott just showed up one of e-commerce websites and did something. Now let's just add that to the vector that represents you. Now we have a new representation. Yeah. Now that we have that for you, and we can also do the same thing with what I'm trying to sell, with all my items, with all my catalog, with all my brands. Mm-hmm. So now it becomes matching two vectors, and with AI, now all of that becomes a simple function to just go ahead and get what you need to match an item to a person, or a category to a person, or a brand to a person. But building that infrastructure is where things have gone now.
Yeah, I think that's a really powerful insight. I just want to emphasize this for folks who are tuning in on this, because, again, we've been used to thinking of these structured records that you would run SQL queries on. Everyone, I think, has now become familiar with the idea of these vector databases associated with LLMs and the way in which, they manage content and, information that they're responding to. But yeah, to think about well, wait a second. It doesn't just have to be historical, content that fed into those sorts of vectors. Take that same sort of architecture model and now apply it to customer data. And in particular, this idea of, ever dynamic and being updated customer data. Yeah, this idea of everything's a vector. It's such a simple concept and yet so powerful and paradigm changing in so many ways.
Exactly. And thinking about that as well, we had, if everything is a vector and everything can be turned into embeddings and things like that, now you can start to do all kinds of interesting use cases with it, whether it's first party ad targeting, third party ad targeting, things like that. But at the heart of it, I think Dave had a slide on just a minute ago, we have to still think about identity, right? When we think about finding a way to activate this data, that vector represents somebody. and that somebody is represented in multiple first-party and third-party systems with an ID. So how do you do cross-channel identity is kind of a core part, the center part of this whole picture. But then it's not just that. You got to make sure there's consent, right? Identity is great, but if someone doesn't want to be targeted and they raise their hand, how do you update this vector, if you will, with that information? Or if it's just a simple consent lookup in some database, that too is fine. But you have to have identity, then you have to make sure that there's consent enforced. And if you're going to do all this real time, you want to make sure that all of this is captured and processed real time. And then there's the other part about delivery, right? Now my endpoint in MarTech or AdTech before, in the old world, would have been a database or a warehouse or a third-party CRM system or an orchestration capability company or something like that. But now you have to deliver it to an AI system to update that vector, right? And there's still emerging sort of discussion around whether you want your personal data to be part of an AI-generated model, right? And whether that model is a public model like that we have from the large AI research labs, or is it a private model where you hold on to your first-party data and only use that at retrieval time to augment what you're trying to do, or you might even go a bit further than that, right? So I think this is a highly, highly dynamic, evolving situation at the moment. But at the end of the day, identity, consent, and delivery end up being the three key parts that you need to be able to sort of have deliver before you start making your marketing AI ready.
So one of the things, I love those as the three pillars. Makes a ton of sense. I just want to actually tug a bit on the thread here around like consent first collection, because I think one of the things that is, really distinguished MetaRouter and the capabilities that you're providing customers is this concept. It's been previously described shifting left. This idea of basically moving more of these sorts of decisions to much closer to the actual point of collection. Could you maybe just share a little bit about what are the advantages of that approach? How does that differ from, maybe the old ways we've done this?
Yeah, the first advantage is that you have a single point of consent enforcement, right? Before any kind of distribution happens. So as the chief compliance officer, as the chief legal officer of a very large consumer business, many of our clients, like we have 3 of the top 5 US retailers, right? And it's really important for them that when there is sensitive information, when there's even non-sensitive but consent information, I don't want to be targeted, all of that is enforced. So it starts to happen at the edge, shift left, right? We are now collecting that information at the edge, on the browser, in the app. So as consumers are doing their thing, we're enforcing it right away. And that's a real valuable proposition. And we're also doing it in the customer's data cloud. We, as MetaRouter, do not store any data. We put our software, we're a software vendor, we put it in the customer's cloud, and from there, customers have full control of what they do with that information. So this becomes a really important part. So in my last role, I was part of an ad tech company. And one of the things that we need to, as retail media starts to take off, one of the things we need to make sure is if a user says, I don't want to be targeted for ads, I need to make sure as a retailer that I'm honoring that, because now I'm an advertising business. I'm no longer a retailer. So you may still get ads, but they may not be targeted. So this is the important thing that has to happen at the edge. But then you kind of start to think about, okay, it's just not data, it's models, it's vectors. How can I update the vectors with what the users are doing? But also, how can I make inferences about what the users are about to do? So this is the other shift that we enable, that in the real time at the edge, not only are we sort of thinking about models and vectors and consumer profiles, but also thinking about what the propensity that consumer is likely to do. So it's no longer about writing a query into a database, creating a propensity model, creating an audience match and uploading it. That's at a minimum 15-minute cycle, probably most cases 24 to 48 hour. Now that whole thing is real time, because you make a call, you have a vector, you make a real-time inference call, you retrieve back some kind of propensity, you switched into the identity, you check for consent, and you upload the audience real time. All of it happens within milliseconds, worst case, half a second, right? So that is the paradigm now, right? There is no need for you to write a query and wait for the thing to come back and do a match and argue with your vendor about the match rates. And no, it's done, right? That's That's where things are headed.
Very nice, very nice. Well, I think maybe we have a slide here too on. Yes, all right. I guess this is just one of the truisms. It's always been the truism of data and marketing, but boy, it's even more.
Oh, I thought you were referring to garbage in, garbage out. That's also been a truism.
Yeah. No, I mean, people talk about hallucinations and all this. For many of these use cases, the much bigger risk is like, I'm feeding poor data into it. Because then like it doesn't even have a chance.
Correct.
So I think actually let's move to this next slide, because one of the things I was really excited to dive into a little bit here was because I'm a MarTech nerd, so I love to actually get into a little bit of like the stack component of like, okay, what is actually this architecture? In particular, again, like we'll talk more about this, but MetaRouter, you're very intentional about framing the solution as infrastructure, and so I'd love you just sort of walk us through this architecture and why it's infrastructure more than a particular application.
100%. So we are an infrastructure or a technology platform, if you will, for one simple reason. We're all talking about data and AI and models and everything. But the one simple reason why we are a technology platform or an infrastructure is because we don't ourselves, we don't ourselves store any data. That is the key. We are a data collection, enrichment, and distribution platform with compliance built into it. But we are not a data storage. So that is the key. That is the key sort of positioning for MetaRouter in the market. So talking about collection, not only your first-party data, but you can see on the left column, we have a proprietary technology and partnerships to collect third-party IDs as well. And we have a huge ecosystem of partnerships for both anonymous and known users. So the first thing we do is we collect user events and identity and give you the identity to own. It's not like an ID graph or anything that you would think about from a traditional sense. It's just a list of anonymous IDs for a user, and when they log in, we attach a login to it, all real time on the client side. But once we collect that, we also need to apply consent. So now in your infrastructure stack, I described us to MetaRouter as a real-time infrastructure and not a data platform, right? We don't have any data. So in the stream, we're adding compliance information saying this user has all these IDs from all these third parties, and their targeting consent is yes or no. Their analytics consent is yes or no, right? Or they've given us broad consent, or the consent is opt-in by default in the US or opt-out by default in Europe, GDPR, right? So there's consent types and enforcement as well. So once you have the IDs and the consent, now you can do some enrichment. We're sitting inside the virtual private cloud of our customers. So we can have the ability to query using the ID to any internal loyalty information. One of the most interesting things for our retail customers is in-store purchases. Query the information, bring it back. Now, as part of the customer profile, whether it's a vector or a traditional database, rows and columns, whatever, we have both online information and in-store information all sitting inside the private cloud of our customers, right? So far, nothing has left. Everything is just being collected, and everything is being enforced with consent right there at the point of collection and distribution. Now let's talk about where it goes and where it leaves the organization and goes to third parties. So this architecture allows you to enforce consent, add additional rules. Like in one retailer's case, there may be some sensitive PHI information in the checkout, in the cart, in the basket, if you will, with both some chocolates and things, and also some sensitive things like medical tests or some kind of a drug or something, right? We want to be able to leverage the marketable items, but drop the ones that are not. So in the stream, we apply all these rules, business rules, as well as regulatory rules, and then distribute to any third party that you'd want, whether it's in an internal sort of data warehouse or an analytics platform or your own CDP. We are great friends with all the CDPs because we are not one, right? We don't store any data. Or for any of your marketing use cases, using the enriched data and the identities that you see in the column 3 as a way to sort of transfer the data over or transmit the data over. So that's kind of the architecture we're talking about here. And one of the destinations in the fourth column are AI training models. It's your internal. So it's basically ensuring that anything you collect from the front end is adjusted for compliance adjusted for privacy preferences, and then fed into marketing and AI models, all in real time with a platform that can orchestrate all of this. And you can also store it. But we don't. MetaRouter is a technology platform infrastructure, but as a customer, you won't want to keep it as a retailer, right? So that's what we do, and I hope that explains this architecture.
Yeah, I know a number of times you all have referred to MetaRouter as the CDP's best friend. Yeah, I mean, this is one of the perfect reasons for it. Is you are not a data storage platform, but the success of those data storage platforms, it goes back to what we were saying on the previous slide. It's like a garbage in, garbage out. You guys are making sure, all right, let's get really high quality data in here, where high quality is, again, like getting that right ID resolution. It's doing the enrichment on it, but it's also making sure that it's passing through in real time. So you're able to get those behavioral signals, take advantage of it as quickly as possible. I am dying to dig into a little bit more on the retail and commerce side of this with you. Do you want to maybe talk a little bit more about the specific use cases that are being unlocked with this?
Yeah, certainly. So our ability to collect, process, and transform data in real time has led to some really interesting use cases. Specifically, I'm a retail media guy, Scott. I started the original ads business at Walmart, and now at Bain was advising now in Moloko, and now at MetaRouter. This is a space I know pretty well, right? So what we've unlocked is the ability for, number one, retailers to significantly increase their audience sizes off-site. When I say off-site audience size increase, I really mean a combination of known identity and unknown identity together, building a really strong, large audience pool. So what does that mean? So it means that we can now bring much bigger data sets for our retail media offsite partners to work off of based on our entity. But the transformation capability and the real-time processing capability of MetaRouter has enabled another control that retailers had to do manually before. Before, retailers would build audiences based on some brand-specific queries, allow that to go to one ad account or two ad accounts, and have a managed service that, because you don't want all the brands to have access to all the data, it was a clunky operation. What we've been able to do with our identity collection and distribution capability is to route each and every user based on what they did on a platform into a specific ad account that's different by brand and jointly owned between the retailer and the brand. So now a brand one and retailer one can collaborate on an offsite campaign on some third-party platform, call it Facebook, that allows them to both invest budgets, have a much larger audience to target because the match rates now are both anonymous and known IDs. That allows the platform, call it the meta optimization algorithms, to find more lookalikes. And then it's not that you have to control it a lot because the data is forked and transformed into multiple different ad accounts. So if you're like a CPG grocery retailer and you're working with 5 CPGs, each of those gets their own ad account on Meta, which you jointly own and collaborate and add budgets into. So with higher fidelity data, that's more matches, more data into the platforms, and adding more real time, all of the data gave us an incredible amount of value. The ROASs were up at a low end at 40%, at a high end at 350% at the high end.
Okay, that's
pretty incredible.
Yeah. I'm just curious, how does this compare with the systems you built back in the day at Walmart?
This is a great question. I mean, it was early days, right? So we were having our own implementation of Hadoop, and my startup was acquired, right? So, and then we had to switch to Hadoop, but having another Hadoop itself ancient now. But having that infrastructure to receive all the data, then someone is writing MapReduce queries to process all of this to create audiences. Then we have a third-party partnership, what's called onboarding today, to connect those matches in an anonymous, privacy-safe way into third-party activation platforms like DSPs or walled gardens or whatever. I mean, at that time, even walled gardens were sort of figuring out custom audiences, and they didn't really exist, right? We were helping create some of that infrastructure out there. all of that was probably at a minimum an hour, and in some cases was days before advertisers could log in and do something. And by the way, it was all fully controlled because there was no way to easily bifurcate this data unless you massively increase the number of queries into your aging Hadoop cluster, right? So now that all things on the client side. You don't have to do any of this infrastructure. You should and keep the data and store it, but you don't have to, right? You can start with business rules or inferences right on the edge, create your audiences, apply brand-specific filters so that when I say or brand-specific routing, so that you can take it all directly into the ad account of that brand that's co-owned with the retailer. All of that happens in stream. It's really so AI has really changed the way you would create and activate audiences in the world of MarTech.
Pretty wild. And by the way, thank you for the throwback to MapReduce. It had been many a year since I thought about those. I'm just curious here. I know you have a lot of confidential information on clients, but are there even like some, more generalized or anonymized, examples you can give of like how different kinds of retail commerce media businesses are using this?
Yeah, we just talked about one use case, right, where we are able to send audiences at the brand level real time into different ad accounts, right? And that's based on just, hey, this user looked at this item from this manufacturer or brand, and they may have bought it, or they may have looked at it, they may have searched on a keyword with it. Like, it's basically, let's call it human readable rules of why someone needs to go into a certain ad account for a certain brand, right? But now we're starting to have conversations where those things are not based on what the user did, but based on what the user is likely to do, a propensity. One specific conversation we're having with a very large e-commerce platform is they have an internal model that uses real-time inference and AI to predict whether a user comes back with MarTech and paid media or whether the user comes back on organic. Right. So now, as the user is building their profile by clicking and browsing, their model is creating a propensity that this user comes back on paid. And we ping that model real time and retrieve the propensity that they'd come back paid. If the answer is no, they're likely to come back organic, we drop the user real time from the audience that goes to paid marketing. So all the MarTech channels that search or retargeting or affiliates or whatever else, Facebook, TikTok shops or whatever it is that you're sending your audiences to will no longer receive this user because now there is a prediction that they'll come back organically. Now, the beauty of this is we store that information right there. So when the user does come back organically or doesn't, we can now retrain the model. We can send that information back to the AI inside that company that's creating this prediction and say, hey, your prediction was off. You said this user is likely to come back organic, but they didn't, or the reverse. You didn't say that they would come back, but they did. Right? So that's a very simple suppression use case. But think about the power of having a propensity use case where, hey, this user didn't buy this, doing all this search is likely to buy this brand. How powerful would that be for a brand to know that in real time based on a propensity?
No, if you're doing that at scale, that's a tremendous amount of money.
Tremendous, right? And we already saw the results having done it sort of with a manual rules-based approach with the example I just gave with the multiple ad accounts. Imagine doing that without rules, with all propensity, with all AI, with all embeddings and vector spaces. Stuff becomes really, really powerful.
The age of miracles and wonders with AI. I love it. Well, I know we want to be able to also get to audience questions and sort of take some of these other topics a little bit further around this. But before we do that, could you maybe just for folks listening in, what would be the 2 or 3 takeaways you would like them to have of just even understanding, okay, how does this model of customer data infrastructure change what they can do?
Yeah, so the core of the customer data infrastructure is moving customers from client-side data collection to server-side, right? So that way you get rid of third-party tags, you own control of your data so you can enforce consent and do what you need to do only when you need to do it. So that server-side routing and control of information enables both marketing and AI use cases. We just talked a lot about that, right? But that requires owning your anonymous and known IDs. Because owning that allows you to now ping a third-party MarTech media platform and say, hey, this ID, show them this data. So speed, super fast, happens real time. Compliance, because now before you send the ID, you check, hey, did this person opt in or opt out of marketing? If they said no, you immediately drop them. If they said yes, you send them over. And then because you're doing this in one place and then having it apply to any marketing channel based on the type of channel it is, analytics, marketing, AI, right? You can have different consent categories, if you will. So now it allows you to have scalable governance. So your compliance and privacy team doesn't have to say, oh my God, you're asking me to add a new channel. Is that a marketing channel? Is that an analytics channel? Is that an AI training channel? What is it? And now I got to work out all the, no, none of it. You just specify the type and all the rest of it is inherited from your consent and compliance perspective, right? That's a real different way of doing things, which means team collaboration is critical for success, right? People are used to a certain way of doing things. There's operating models in place. The retail media team calls the marketing team, which works with the merchandising team, the privacy compliance team, tags, technology. There's a bunch of jargon. There's a lot of stuff going on. So a lot of team collaboration is really, really important. And this was actually one of the biggest areas of work when I did at Bain to help people think about when there's a new operating model, the new paradigm that's enabled by new capability, how do you bring it all together? And that collaboration is critical for success.
Yeah. Can we just actually tug on that a bit before we go to the Q&A? Because, yeah, I mean, the shift here in the technology architecture and what it enables is, pretty wild. But yeah, to your very point here and your experience at Bain, the technology is a piece of this, but it's then everything else around this for the organization, the structure, the process, the culture. We'd love to just get your perspective on what do companies need to be thinking about for more of the organizational side of this to really be able to take advantage of what this technology makes possible?
Yeah, so look, I think there is several implications, and maybe I'll pick a specific example around retail media, right? When you're doing retail media, you're now transitioning as a company from a B2C retailer to a B2B enterprise media company. You have salespeople selling ads. You don't have merchants buying items. And the relationship between a retailer and a supplier flips from that of a customer to that of a vendor. Instead of buying shampoo from Procter & Gamble, you're selling shampoo ads to Procter & Gamble. It's a fundamentally different relationship between the retailer and the brand. You also are now having a sidebar conversation with a partner you've been together for 100 years on the retail side. Now you're having a sidebar conversation through the retail media team on the ad side. That creates an operating model challenge between your merchandising team and your media team. Mm-hmm. And now that's a problem. Now you also want to not only do ads on site, you want to go off site. But guess who owns your off-site channels? Your marketing team, your MarTech guys. Now, as the retail media person, you got to go work to figure out, okay, can I use my Facebook account? By the way, I need it structured by brand, not by category. So people are buying ads on search, classic AdWords account, right? Electronics, home, appliances, outdoor living. You have all these different categories as a retailer that you're buying. No, I don't want an electronics account. I want a Samsung account. I want a Dell account. I want an Apple account, right? You're fundamentally reshifting the entire AdWords campaign structure at this point. Work with your internal MarTech team if you want to do retail media offsite. All of this, yes, the technology can enable and send a user directly to a brand account on Facebook. But if there is no brand account to send it to, what are you going to do, right? So there's a pretty significant operating model challenge with the marketing team, merchandising team, and web team, analytics team. There's a bunch of stuff that has to happen now that previously a retailer didn't have to deal with, particularly the fact that they're now a seller of stuff, not a buyer of stuff, fundamentally with the same counterparty. It's crazy to think about that, right? So it's a pretty big operating model challenge. And that was just the retail media example. I can go on about others, but I hope that gives you some color of what that looks like.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you actually for walking through that example too, because again, this is historically in MarTech, one of the places that just companies have underinvested in. They buy amazing technologies, don't always think through the investment they need to do at the org level. And so I think,
change management is a huge deal, right? And this is having a perspective on that before you jump into something like this is really, really critical.
Awesome. Well, maybe we'll get to talk a little bit more about that. We should probably bring back Dave, who is our moderator for the Q&A portion. Welcome back, my friend.
Thank you. That was a fascinating conversation. I was sitting here like this, if you guys couldn't watch in the background. So, thank you both. We've got some really good questions coming in, both from YouTube and LinkedIn and a few others. I thought this is a really interesting one. We talked a little bit about, some of the team dynamic, and this is my own question before I jump in there. It's a little selfish, but just got my wheels spinning. So I guess I'll start with you, Nikhil, and then Scott, would love your thoughts too. Are you seeing AI be the biggest driver of change right now? I mean, is it, we talked about like the change management and always, obviously some, improved ad spend and targeting and better performance and analytics. I mean, we have these kind of core stakeholders that care about this. And they're all kind of coming at AI from their own unique perspective. Is there this like cross paradigm where they need to align on what AI means to the organization first before they start to implement that? Or are they starting projects kind of representing their own team across the board and then figuring out what does infrastructure look like? I mean, I don't know if that's a perfect question to answer, but what is the biggest agent of change here?
Yeah, I'm happy to take a crack. Scott, do you want to go first? I know Dave threw it at me, but I'm happy to take it. But
sure,
you see a lot of people.
You do, yeah, for sure.
Well, I think, So I'll answer the yes in the affirmative. AI is absolutely driving, a tremendous amount of change here. But I think the twist I would put to it is it's not just the actual AI executions. In many ways, this like just disruption that everyone acknowledges is happening with AI is driving, first of all, just a whole bunch of change in the requirements. I mean, just what we're talking about here for like the data infrastructure side of things, like you need to get your data infrastructure house in order to support AI. But you get that data infrastructure in place, it is not just benefiting, the latest LLM model. It's like so many of these capabilities across your tech stack that have, in many cases, been starved for data or starved for good data. And the fact that AI has sort of provided this motivation to like, wow, we should really get the data house in order. I think one of the great things about that is it's giving people a lot of benefits above and beyond just the specific AI-powered use cases that they want to bring online. And I think the second thing along that line is the cultural shift. I mean, again, this is where you were chatting a little bit earlier, and it's so near and dear to my heart. Change is hard. And the larger the organization it is, like the harder it is to actually drive that sort of change. And so one of the gifts of this like massive AI disruption that we're all going through right now is from the board level on down, it is basically giving people a mandate like, we have to change, we have to adapt. Yeah. And while that's certainly helpful for like figuring out the AI components of this, just again, like the data infrastructure side of things, just being able to get companies to think like, wow, we really do need to start to rethink how we operate. We need to be able to move faster. We need to be able to give people more permission to be able to make changes. That's, again, just one of these things that you get so many additional benefits above and beyond the specific AI cases that might be the catalyst for it. So,
right.
No question. Nothing much to add there other than the fact that it is absolutely the key driver of change across the enterprise from the boardroom on down.
Yep.
Definitely in marketing.
Yep.
There's no question that this is a real thing that's here to stay, that has created real value. Look, it came out of Google. They used this particularly to drive their advertising business up. Yep. And in an environment of flat search growth, the search ad revenue kept growing. That's all because of this type of capability. That was all real-time inference, modeling, personalization of ads. That capability has now been unlocked for MarTech to take care of, to leverage. So it has to be a key part of the stack. And to Scott's, your point, this is now proprietary data, right? So so one of the insights from my head of machine learning and AI at MetaRouter came over from Walmart. He was AI lead there, and then at Square Block, Workday, right? He's built some large scale AI systems, Patrick, and he's joined us. And his insight was that, this is the way the world is going, right? We're going to have to be able to bring all of this capability into the MarTech stack, and starts with the proprietary data. The models learn from the public internet, the structure of an e-commerce website, the structure of a airline, a hotel. All of this is known to the LLMs now. Everybody knows how all these industries are structured from a digital perspective. It's all captured. Like 0.1% of the internet is left. And that 0.1% of the internet is your proprietary first-party data.
Yeah.
So you take this public information that structured all the models, and then keep your private first-party data within your walled garden and leverage that with the models. That is going to be the way this thing is going to work in marketing, where your proprietary first-party data, your consumer relationship, combined with an AI model, together will create an incredible value for your business. And it has to be the way. There is no, I don't see any other way this thing is going to play out.
Yeah, that's fascinating. One more follow-on question. I promise to get to some audience questions that are really good that we'll unpack. But Nikhil, I'll start with you on this one as well. Just do you see there's any risk? Like, we use the word personalization all the time. Like, it started, I talked to Scott about this a little bit. Like, it started with just the ability to use your CRM data or purchase data and personalize, dear Dave. We've come a long way. Mm-hmm. Is there any risk with organizations not really having full control or ownership of their data as it stands today during this transition period? Like, are we going to see the Wild West, even further in some use cases where it gets
absolutely
better?
There's a huge risk here, and you saw Cloudflare's announcement maybe a month ago that they're going to stop the AI bots from crawling, right? Mm-hmm. And well, I don't know how. Look, Dave, I don't know how it's going to play out. Yeah. But having the control of your first-party data is got to be a key differentiator for you. If you let this thing also become part of the model that reduces everybody to the lowest common denominator, in that case, the only ones that win are the AI labs, right? Everybody else loses. So it's important to have control of your first-party data and being able to respect user preferences. I don't want my data maybe to be part of an LLM. I don't know if you query an LLM about Nikhil Raj, where it's going to return my home phone number, versus it's going to return my SSN because somebody shipped it. I don't know, right? I don't know how these things work. I know there's a lot of math and vectors and stuff behind it, but control of that data and consumer preferences is going to be critical. And that's why collection with someone like a MetaRouter into your infrastructure, applying the consent preferences there before distribution, has to be the key architecture for AI. That's kind of what we reviewed earlier, right? I think that's really, really important. Control.
Scott, anything to add?
I definitely, I'd double down on that. I think the things I would just emphasize is, I think in the history of personalization, where we're so accustomed to using, that more structured data. That has always been the easy data for us to access and use. And don't get me wrong, again, still a lot of value to be had out of that. But I think the opportunity for marketers to sort of open the aperture of thinking, well, wait a second, we have actually now all this real-time behavioral data that we're getting now, multi-channel, omni-channel. The unstructured data, I mean, we could have a whole session just on that, but the ability to be able to take, whether it's, someone sending an email or with some conversation they had, with the contact center, and actually being able to mine that dynamically, for insights that can change that profile for personalization and do it at the speed, business actually operating. These are incredible things. I mean, and marketers can be forgiven for most not doing anything with this yet, because it just wasn't possible, until now, very, very recently.
It was locked. It was possible, but locked inside Google. And until that paper came out, attention is all you need. And then that just unlocked the whole thing. Yeah.
So a lot of good stuff here with first-party data, and we barely scratched the surface of it.
No question about that. So let's jump into maybe a little bit more tactical question, but this comes from Sunny. I'll show it on the screen here. Essentially, probably Nikhil, best suited for you. Scott, feel free to add on. But we're just talking about really scalability. And we talk about this a lot, especially with enterprise companies. And we know the holidays are quickly approaching. So how does MetaRouter essentially scale for peak loads when retailers have bunches of checkouts for holiday and peak viewing and all that good stuff?
Look, we have a very modular deployment paradigm. Kubernetes. No, I don't know what the right word is, but we are able to scale our platform sort of along with workloads. This is kind of how the modern cloud infrastructure really works. Take the Google Kubernetes engine example. As you start to see holiday traffic scale up, you could start to do it at that time. It's not advised, but you can pre-provision resources with your cloud partner and deploy more instances of your data collection and distribution MetaRouter platform and auto scale the thing up as the traffic starts to come in, and decommission those resources. And as the traffic starts to wane, like I remember between November 1st and Black Friday in Walmart, there was a 6x increase in traffic in the 20 days. And then there's a 6x decrease from November 25th to shipping cutoff. Shipping cutoff is the last day before you can ship something to someone's house for Christmas, for holiday gifts. The shipping cutoff was somewhere around the 20th of December, 22nd.
Usually when I'm most active, by the way.
Yeah. So between November 1st and shipping cutoff was a massive 6x scale up and down. It was a nightmare, right? But now with the cloud infrastructure and auto scaling capabilities of not only compute but also storage, but everything else, right? So you can start a network, you can start to do these things really, really well, and that's built right into our platform.
Yeah, we're really built for that, and we have some great customer stories, and a lot of times understanding that further just results in a good conversation at the top of how. Yeah, that's kind of what
at peak load. I think there was a question. The question also had some numbers in there or load. I think we were processing hundreds of thousands of events a second, right? It's not, and we could go we go to millions if required, much larger infrastructure, but certainly doable.
Yep. So this is kind of a follow-on question. Sorry, Nikhil, kind of cutting off.
Oh, this is a good one. Yeah.
Yeah. So the new paradigm of one-to-many retail brand and customer data is pretty complex because each customer will have hundreds of brand preferences. How do we maintain, and when I say we, I mean MetaRouter, throughput and latency in the model audience fine-tuning with so many brands per customer?
Oh, it's a great question. Look, at the end of the day, the retrieval of someone's brand preference, you're on a website, MetaRouter can make a call from inside the infrastructure to some internal API and ask for a cutoff and say, what are the N brands, not 10, N brands that this consumer is likely to buy greater than 50%. Let's just use a random number, greater than X%. You get back 10 brands. Now, all we have to do is maintain the mapping table of that brand to the brand's Facebook account that's jointly owned with the retailer. So that's all you need to do. So what we are doing, once we get the response back, let's say the lookup for the brand reference is 10 milliseconds. That's some indexed infrastructure that's serving out the preference that's pre-computed or maybe even real-time inference, right? Internal to the infra. So get the inference back or the lookup back, call it 30 milliseconds. Then you look up a mapping table that says, okay, what is the Facebook account API key for this specific account? That's milliseconds, call it 5. So in 35 milliseconds, you have mapped out all the N brands for this particular user across all the Facebook accounts they need to be a part of. And boom, at that point, you just flip it over. Look, we already have the Facebook ID. Remember, we did an identity sync and we have that patented sync injector. So look up the Facebook ID and then flip it over. Yeah. And that's network bandwidth, network latency. That's probably another 20 milliseconds. So within 100 milliseconds, if a user has N could be in the hundreds of brands, we could flip over a user ID into a third-party marketing platform within 100 milliseconds. It's really not a problem.
That's fascinating. Scott, anything to add? I know that's a little bit more MetaRouter direct, but.
No, that's fantastic.
We'll quiz you at the end if that's okay.
I'm listening. I'm like, wow, okay, got it.
Yeah, right. All right, I have a couple more questions. I know we're getting a little short on time. I want to be mindful of that, but two solid questions I think I want to tack on here. So how can we overcome the concept of shift left targeting optimization in AI? And that's kind of an evolving question, I'm sure, but I'll let either one of you guys kind of tackle that.
Scott, what's the interpretation of overcome the shift left? You brought that up. Maybe you want to interpret that for us, and then we can both take a crack at it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, I think one of the things here. All right, so this is my interpretation.
Maybe Dave, can you leave the question up?
But yeah, please weigh in if I don't have it right. To me, my understanding of where the power is in the shift left is not so much that you're optimizing that specific experience where the touch point was. Like there's a particular, it's basically the input. That, okay, I get this opportunity. I can now very immediately essentially qualify that input. I can make sure like, okay, I've got the consent to be able to leverage this information. I can resolve the identity to make sure that what I'm seeing here is now a part of the same identity, the same record that individual that I want to be able to connect with. That if there's any sort of like enrichment I want to do of like, okay, let me connect that to the other data sources, whether it's vector or something more classic, and be able to make sure that's attached. And now I push it down. Now, the benefit of having all that stuff happening shift lefted, is by the moment you now push something downstream, it's been validated, it's been resolved, it's been enriched. Now the question becomes like, okay, downstream, what do you want to do from an optimization? Which I expect are a lot of the things we've always wanted to be able to do with optimization. And I guess maybe one thing I should add is I'm picturing this in my head of upstream and downstream, upstream being a particular, touch point, and then a downstream being an optimization of experience. But the whole point of being able to do this in real time is that quote unquote downstream experience might actually be directly in the flow of, what the prospect or customer is doing. So I don't really think of it as like a way you would be over optimizing, that sort of shift left side of things. But I don't know, Nikhil, do you have a different view on that?
No, I think that's right. I was trying to interpret the user's question on what's overcome the shift left optimization. I'm not sure exactly what that meant. So thank you for clarifying that. My take is that instead of collecting first and step 2 to the right, acting on it and creating propensities and all that stuff, I think the role of the data science and machine learning team is now shifted left as well, where you're now leveraging the latest and greatest technologies, call it the machine learning tech that drives the transformer technology, basically that drives GPTs. Now, instead of doing a GPT, a generative prediction, you're now doing a predictive, you're now doing a PPT. You're not generating stuff, you're literally predicting something out of it, not a PowerPoint. But now that predictive transformers are now returning all of the information that you need right at the point of collection, all the predictive information right at the point of collection with the real-time inference. That's what I understand by shift left. So now you're able to act on a consumer's sort of behavior, learn from it in real time, and respond back to it in real time, all in the order of milliseconds or hundreds of milliseconds, right? That is how I see shift left. Like the role of the data science team is now no longer, okay, I'm going to wait for the data to come into my warehouse, I'm going to run some models, and I'm going to do this feature engine. No. Just do it all real time with inference. Now you've got access to your NVIDIA GPUs. That seems to be the selling point at Facebook these days. Like, how many GPUs do I have? You have that, right? You get that capability. So now you can build models and you shift the entire action of learning from consumer behavior and responding to it left. That's what you're doing, right? With this new paradigm of AI.
It's fascinating. It's fascinating how fast, I think, half the challenge was just access to the data. Now we have access to the data. When we talk about like compliance at the point of collection, that's kind of how we talk about it internally. It's like anything beyond that, to the right of that is ready for AI. It's ready for personalization, targeting, anything else. And so that's really our mantra, right? So if it doesn't, someone doesn't consent, it stops there. And so that data is essentially, excluded from the rest of anything else that we're talking about. But that gives greater access to the data in flight. I think that the AI teams and the analytics teams and performance can all have access to the data when they need it to adjust things in real time. So really good question. Thank you guys. So let's take one more here. This one's from Martin. How do you view the relative importance of direct channels for B2C engagement, specifically desktop, mobile web, and mobile app?
What do you think of that, Scott? You want me to take a quick crack at it from a MetaRouter perspective before you give us the industry point of view?
Sure. Yeah, go for it, my friend.
I go back to our 3 steps, right? Identity collection, consent management, and then distribution, right? So we've tied all of the user data that we collect, B2C engagement data, if you were to use the vernacular of the question. So Dave, just leave it on again if maybe it goes back automatically. But that B2C engagement data is enriched with consent, enriched with identity, and then distributed over. So specifically desktop, mobile web, and mobile app, I think, are different ecosystems for how you collect that identity part. In the desktop mobile web world, you have the web-based identity frameworks of anonymously cookies, logged in emails, or whatever else. And in the mobile app world, there's obviously the difference between the iOS ecosystem and the Android ecosystem, right? So the notion of identity in those different environments, client side and server side, is quite different, and server side starts to bring those two together a little bit. Then the engagement part, and then then how do you do the distribution? So once you have an ID in the sort of the desktop world or the mobile web world or in the app world, how do you use that information to do the distribution, right? So the relative importance really comes down to what you see your own consumers doing. And if you have strong AI or non-AI predictive models, and you might say that, Scott's most likely to engage when you send him SMS, and Dave is most likely to engage if you send him a WhatsApp, right? That's kind of the engagement channel. I know the question was about data collection, desktop, mobile web, and a mobile app, but I think the preferences of a consumer and our ability to predict that and then act appropriately also come into play from a marketing channel perspective. So that's kind of my take on that. I don't know, Scott, if you have anything to... That's kind of how MetaRouter from an ID perspective we think about it, but what would you say from your perspective?
Yeah, that was a much better answer than I would have given. I would have fallen back on the classic consultant's answer of it depends, because it actually really does depend tremendously, on the business you're in, and not just that, but like individual consumers as well too. To me, again, this sort of comes back to the whole thing of like why it's so important for us to distinguish between a infrastructure layer that is able to underpin the entire tech stack versus individual applications or individual channels, is because, first of all, yeah, it is just going to vary a lot, very like that in different segments and different individuals, in your customer base. But also because, man, this stuff is changing fast. Like, as the technology keeps changing, like consumer behaviors, it is kind of amazing how rapidly consumer behaviors are adapting. We're seeing this in particular right now around all things with search and the impact, with AI. And so I think, yeah, sort of looking at this as a view of like, okay, it's not about one optimal set of channels and how do we just make that work really well. It's about developing this capacity to be able to dynamically adapt what are the right channels for this segment, for this individual. And as things keep changing, I was going to say like year over year, but really it seems more like month over month at this point. Yeah.
I mean, if everybody can deploy their own MarTech, it's going to be day over day, right? And look, at the end of the day, we are the underpinning infrastructure. You have 15,000 pixels on your page now. You probably have 150,000 by the next time we have this call. But the beauty of MetaRouter is that you would not need to worry about all of that. If you're able to collect identity and consent in one place, then whoever wants access to that, your compliance team has already approved it. Your privacy team has already approved it. Your users' preferences are already encoded. The regulations are already encoded. It's done. The data stream is ready, not only for 15,000, but 15 million if you'd like. Like everybody makes their own MarTech stack. Sure. The data feeding that is clean. That's what we enable.
Yeah. And if you think about it as a marketer myself, it's got, and I've been a MetaRouter for about 5 years, or it's really kind of the way it should have been done all along. Like, I think that's kind of like core of what we're really trying to help organizations do is like take this back, right? That true ownership. All right. 1 minute, one question on the hot seat. Are there third parties that get left out with this shift left mentality?
It's a great question. Third party is a very broad representation of everybody that a consumer company works with, right? Any B2C company is a potential customer of MetaRouter. They work with a lot of third parties. My positioning with MetaRouter and what we try to do is, the answer is no. The ability of that third party to work with that consumer company is really the only thing that matters, right? If you have a compelling offering within your tech stack, one of the 150,000 pixels that are about to happen on Scott's chart, or one of the 15,000 that are there now, you've got something valuable that you want to bring to your customer. They happen to be using MetaRouter, and we'll work with you. So for us, it's not about who gets left out, but it's really about what our customers want. And we have a long integration roadmap, and we work with many third parties on that roadmap. And some of them have just one customer, literally one customer. And some of them are the industry standard, some kind of industry standard MarTech, right? We work with all of them.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you on this. Like, to me, it's the exact opposite. The whole point of having an open architecture for an infrastructure like this is actually makes it easier to bring in more third parties, whether it's on the collection side, the data optimization side, the downstream experience side. So, glad to hear your answer. That's going to match my understanding of this as well.
Exactly. So I discovered this power, Scott, when I was at Walmart, right? We built server-side capability to bring third parties in and out. We were doing that at a page view level. One third party would get a request and an ID for one page. The next page would be a different third party. We were controlling third party access to Walmart data at the page level, right? So that is the capability that this enables. In fact, it brings more people in, like you said, doesn't leave anybody out.
Yep. The flexibility angle is a huge, not having to wait for, code freezes and all of that stuff. MetaRouter allows marketers to be a lot more agile. And I think agility could be a whole nother topic, for compliance and what does that look like? We will not unpack that today because we're 2 minutes over. So I'll have to give some people some tokens back for their time. But I do want to thank you guys so much. We could obviously keep going on this, and keep talking. But one thing I will commit to is probably using some AI to summarize some notes, and be sure to send out a follow-up email with a link to the recording. We encourage anyone to reach out to us. So be sure to download the 2025 MarTech report, which really inspired a lot of this conversation. So Scott, thank you.
Thank you, Scott,
and your team for all your work there. And we're looking forward to more insights of that later in the year. Be sure to check out MetaRouter. As you know, there's a lot to unpack. And I think a lot of times the best learnings come from actual conversations with some of our team. It's just, you can see a lot of our prospects and customers wheels spinning. So thank you, Nikhil, for kind of sharing your insights, but you've also offered yourself, and your email, which is pretty
I
weird.
I was going to give you my cell phone number to put on the screen there, but you said don't do that. So I'm happy to take. I'm on top of this. No problem.
We'll put it in the slide. So his email is there, but be sure to visit MetaRouter to learn more. And we thank you guys so much for your session and more where this came from. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, everybody. Really appreciate the engagement. Bye now.
Bye.